Throughout my life in Texas, I faced many dangers. Hostile Indians, Mexican armies, desperate bandits. But nothing prepared me for what I found in that summer of 1848 in the isolated lands of western Texas. I was traveling alone through a particularly desolate stretch near the New Mexico border. A region where small communities were 1 day away from each other, isolated and vulnerable. At the time, I was no longer president of the Republic of Texas. The annexation to the United States had happened 3 years earlier, but still kept contacts and influence enough to be sent in discreet missions. It was one of these missions that led me to investigate disturbing accounts from various border communities. The letters arrived at irregular intervals to my office in Austin, all describing similar phenomena, strange disappearances, erratic behaviors of local residents, and, even more disturbing, mentions to a traveling preacher that was never seen during the day. Initially, I discarded such reports as mere border superstition. Texas was filled with religious charlatans in those days, taking advantage of the faith and isolation of the settlers. But when 3 whole communities at Salvation Creek, Mercy Falls, and Providence Junction have completely silenced, without sending any correspondence or sign of life for months, I decided to investigate personally. Salvation Creek was my first stop. Or should have been. When I arrived where the settlement should be, I found only carbonized rubble. The entire village had been reduced to ashes. There were no bodies, no survivors, just an oppressive silence and the lifted ruins of a prosperous community. Only the church remained intact. A simple wooden structure with a modest bell tower, completely unharmed amid devastation, as if the fire had deliberately avoided that building. I tied my horse and entered the empty church. In empty benches, I found an open Bible. The pages were normal until Apocalypse, where the margins were filled with frantic and irregular handwriting. Phrases that made no immediate sense. He comes at midnight. Your words open the way. The other side awaits the faithful. The pulpit was stained with something dark that looked like dry blood. On the floor of the church, a symbol had been deeply carved in the wood, a circle containing an inverted 5-pointed star. I left that church feeling that something observed every movement of mine. On the way to Mercy Falls, I was thinking about the reports. Everyone mentioned a preacher who only appeared at midnight. A tall, thin-eyed man, deeply darkened, words that burned the soul. Mercy Falls was in a bit better condition. The village still existed, but it was practically deserted. The few people I found wandered like sleepwalks, empty looks, answering my questions with disconnected phrases. Reverend showed us the way, said an elderly woman, his lost gaze on the horizon. At midnight, he opens the portal. At midnight, we will be released. The local sheriff was locked in his own cell, the keys thrown outside. As I approached, he clung to the bars tightly, his eyes injected with blood, his body covered with self-inflicted scratches. He had written the same symbol on his walls, using his own blood. You can't stop it, whispered Sheriff when I asked you about the preacher. No one can. He is not from this world. He comes from somewhere. Beyond. I tried to stop him, but his words enter his mind as liquid fire. Where is he now? I asked. Providence Junction, answered the sheriff. It always follows a pattern. 3 churches. 3 congregations. Then, the portal opens permanently. I left the poor man in his cell, promising to send help. But I knew that before that, I needed to reach Providence Junction. If the pattern kept, there was still a chance to save that community. I rode nonstop, coming to Providence Junction at dusk. At first glance, the city seemed normal. People on the streets, commerce working, everyday life following their course. But I soon realized that something was deeply wrong. All residents wore the same symbol hanging from cords around the neck. The inverted star inside the circle. And everyone, without exception, seemed to be waiting for something. A silent expectation hovered in the air. I introduced myself as a traveler, seeking information discreetly. I found that a preacher had arrived in the city 3 weeks earlier and quickly gained the confidence of the local pastor. Their night sermons attracted larger and bigger crowds. You should come tonight, suggested the hostel owner where I installed myself. Reverend Lazarus Gray speaks like no one we've heard before. He knows things that no ordinary man would know. I asked casually why sermons were always at midnight. Reverend says that is when the veil between the worlds gets thinner, the man answered, his eyes shining with sickly enthusiasm. At midnight, we can almost hear the voices on the other side. I felt a chill through my spine. The Reverend Gray was clearly involved in something beyond mere preaching. Something that had destroyed 2 entire communities and was about to do the same with Providence Junction. I spent the rest of the day watching the residents. Everyone seemed healthy, but there was something wrong in their eyes, a feverish intensity, a poorly disguised obsession. Instead of normal greetings, they greeted themselves by saying the other side awaits. With 15 minutes to midnight, I went to church. The building was crowded, barely got a place in the back. The air was heavy with the odor of dozens of candles and something more, a metallic smell that I recognized as blood. Just at midnight, all the doors of the church closed simultaneously. The candles traded, and then he appeared. Reverend Lazarus Gray did not walk to the pulpit, he was simply there, as if he had materialized from the thin air. It was exactly like the descriptions, tall, impossibly thin, wearing a flawless black suit despite the Texan heat. His face was pale as the moon, contrasting with eyes so dark that they seemed to absorb the light around him. "My brothers and sisters," he began, his voice resonating with a hypnotic quality that he physically felt like vibrations within my skull. "Tonight is special. Tonight is our last meeting on this side of the veil." The congregation reacted with excited sighs and murmurs. I realized that many were in a state of almost drugged ecstasy. "For 3 weeks, I prepared you," Gray continued. "For 3 weeks, I have feeding its souls with the truth that the world fears. There is another side beyond this. One side where earthly suffering does not exist, where time has no meaning, where death is just a word without power." As he spoke, his voice seemed to change his timbre, sometimes sounding like several overlapping voices. I felt my own mind starting to become hazy, as if his words are actively suppressing my ability to think critically. "Tonight," he announced, extending his bone hands, "I will open the way. Tonight, you will all go with me to the other side." With increasing horror, I realized that he was talking literally. This was not a metaphorical discourse on salvation. It was a concrete plan to bring the whole community somewhere beyond our known reality. Gray descended from the pulpit and headed for a large baptismal sink in the center of the church. It did not contain water, but a dark liquid that immediately recognized as blood. "Blood is the key," he explained, diving his hands into the liquid. "The blood opens the portal." As he drove a song that looked older than the English language itself, the members of the congregation began to move in line, each plunging his hands in his blood and marking his tests with the star symbol. I knew I needed to act. Whatever the ritual that was happening, it could not end well. But I also knew that facing that mesmerized crowd would be suicide. It was then that I noticed the church bell. A large bronze bell that hung above one of the side aisles. According to an old European superstition that my grandmother used to mention, the sound of a consecrated bell could dispel evil influences. Taking advantage of the collective distraction, I slid down the side corridor to the bell rope. The exact moment Gray began to recite words in a tongue that made my ears hurt, I pulled the rope with all my strength. The sound of the bell exploded through the church as a physical wave. 6 Gray Cambelier, his face writhing in a mask of fury. The congregation seemed momentarily confused, as by awakening from a trance. "Continue," Gray shouted, his voice now clearly inhuman, reverberating as if he came from a deep abyss. "The portal is almost open." I pulled the bell rope again, and once again, and once again. Each trendy seemed to cause physical pain to Gray, who now bowed over himself. The congregation was in chaos. Some ran to the doors, others remained paralyzed, others still tried to continue the ritual, frantically plunging their hands in the blood. Gray turned to me, his eyes now completely black, even where they should be white. "You," he growled him, his voice overlaid by dozens of other voices. "You can't prevent the inevitable." He advanced toward me, moving with an impossible speed for any human being. I kept touching the bell, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. I needed something else. It was then that I remembered the pistol I carried. Not a common weapon, but one that had been blessed by an old Spanish priest years before, during my travels. "For protection against what cannot be named," the priest had said. When Gray was just a few steps from me, I pulled the pistol and shot. The bullet hit it in the chest, but instead of blood, a black, viscous substance began to leak from the wound. Gray shouted, but not of pains of anger. "That doesn't stop me," roared him. "I am eternal." "Maybe," I said, continuing to touch the bell with one hand as it kept the pistol in the other. "But not in this world." I looked again, this time on the symbol that had been designed on the church floor, the same one that turned into Salvation Creek in Mercy Falls. The bullet reached exactly the center of the star, shattering the wood. The effect was immediate and terrible. A supernatural wind exploded from the point of impact, erasing all candles. The darkness took over the church, filled only by the screams of the congregation and an inhuman howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. When someone finally managed to light a lamp, the Reverend Lazarus Gray had disappeared. There was no blood in the baptismal sink, just clean water. And the members of the congregation seemed disoriented, as people awakening from a deep dream. In the following weeks, I worked with local authorities to understand what had happened. The investigation revealed that in each city, Gray had convinced residents to participate in increasingly disturbing rituals, culminating in animal sacrifice and eventually people. The blood was collected for the final ritual. In Salvation Creek in Mercy Falls, the ritual had been completed. Residents disappeared without a trail, except for the few who resisted and were killed in conventional forms. As for Gray, no one knew where he had originally come from. A pastor in El Paso told me that rumors about a midnight preacher have been circulating for decades on the border, always followed by mysterious disappearances. During months after the incident, I had vivid nightmares. He dreamed of a place beyond ours, a kingdom of darkness where the missing of Salvation Creek in Mercy Falls wandered forever, serving entities we prefer not to imagine. And sometimes, when the moon is full and the clock approaches midnight, I still hear that voice, the voice of the Reverend Lazarus Gray whispering in the wind, "You just postponed the inevitable, Houston. The portal will be reopened. And next time you will be on the other side with me." I never told this story publicly before. Some secrets are too heavy to be shared in daylight. But you deserve to know the truth about what lurks in the shadows of our borders. And if you ever hear about a preacher who only appears at midnight, a tall, thin man with eyes that seem to absorb the light, run. They run as fast as they can. And never go into a church when the clock marks midnight. Since that night in Providence Junction, I've never been midnight in a church again. Some risks are not worth running, even for a man who has faced whole armies without hesitation. And as I share this story with you, I feel that same feeling, to be observed. As if, by simply talking about him, I could be opening a small crack in the veil between the worlds. Listen. The clock is about to mark midnight. And I have the strange feeling that somewhere nearby a sermon is about to begin. Before we end this account, if you are visiting our channel for the first time, be sure to subscribe and activate the bell to receive notifications about our upcoming scary stories. Your support means a lot to us, so please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks.